Financial Planner. Follow us on YouTube.
It begins central bank shakeup and the control of the Fed. Let's get into the economic collapse financial news. Now, as we know, the economy, not just here in the United States, but in many different areas, people are struggling every single day. And out in Canada, there was a report showing that Canadian employees, they're living paycheck to paycheck. And the report says that more than a third of those polled said that they feel overwhelmed by debt levels. Nearly half of workers are living paycheck to paycheck due to soaring spending and debt levels. And basically what they said is if their paycheck is a little bit late, guess what? They can't survive. And the poll found 47% of the area, it would be very, very difficult to meet their financial obligations if their paychecks were delayed by even a week. And this is happening here in the United States and across Europe. It's not just happening in one area. There are many, many individuals, and we can see why this is all happening, because the global economy is ripping itself apart. And what we're seeing is, and as we look at all the different economic indicators, that each one of these economic indicators, they are deteriorating very, very quickly. Now, for example, up in Canada still, we know that the housing market is booming, and the housing bubble is just, whoa, out of this world right now. Same thing happening in the United States, especially in the 20 cities that Kay Schiller reports. These are the cities that the Fed was able to blow up the bubbles once again. And in Canada, what we are seeing right now is, well, it looks like the bubble is starting to deflate. It's starting to pop, because what we are seeing in the Greater Toronto area, this is the largest housing market in Canada. Well, it plunged by 34.8% in August compared to a year ago. And what we're seeing right now is that detached homes, they have dropped by negative 41.6%. Semi-detached homes fell by negative 37.3%. Townhouses fell by negative 27.5%. Condos fell by 28%. And what we're seeing is that even the total sales, they have plunged. The number of active listings of homes for sale soared by 65% year over year. And those people who are trying to sell their homes, they're having a very difficult time. And we're seeing that the prices, well, they have plunged by 20%. Basically, what we're seeing right now is that the housing market in Toronto has entered a bear market. And this is not just going to happen in Canada. It's going to happen throughout the United States, in Europe, Australia, because we're all working with the same exact system. The debt levels are too high. People aren't making enough money. The housing prices are skyrocketing because they've created all these bubbles. And what we're seeing right now is everything starting to fall apart. And if you really look at all the economic indicators in all the different sectors, we're starting to see that things are rapidly deteriorating very, very quickly. Now, we know the central bank, they were out there and they were saying, listen, we're going to shrink our balance sheet. And of course, through the corporate media, making these announcements, they said that it's going to begin. They're going to start selling off a lot of their assets. But what's very interesting about all this is that the central bank balance sheet, it's about to hit $20 trillion. Actually, it's continually moving up and up and up. And I know they've been talking about shrinking it, but what we're seeing right now is they are basically in a gigantic bubble themselves, if you really look at it. And they keep adding to their balance sheet. Because what are they doing? They are buying bonds. They are buying toxic real estate, the mortgages. And what we're seeing right now is that it's getting worse. It's only going up. And when the next crisis hits, guess what? The central banks will unveil truly nuclear levels of QE and money printing, because this is all they have left. They have nothing else left to do. Now, we see this huge shakeup in the central bank. Stanley Fischer, the number 2 official at the Federal Reserve, well, he submitted his resignation on Wednesday, citing personal reasons. And what we're starting to see is that these individuals in the central bank, in government, they're going to jump ship. They're going to start to resign. They're going to start to leave. And we can see that if this does happen, and it is happening right now, this is a chance to take control of the central bank system. Actually, Trump could take control of the central bank system and actually maybe dissolve it. I think that would be the best course of action. Will he do it? We don't know right now. So we could see right now that this is all moving forward right now. And we see at this point that there might be more individuals that resign. Now remember, these individuals, they were appointed by Obama. So right now, Trump faces a major task in choosing the next chairman of the Fed before February and replacing most of the central bank's board of governors. Now, one Fed watcher called it the biggest overhaul of the Fed's leadership since 1936. I would rather see him dissolve the Federal Reserve, take control of who creates the currency. There is no reason to have the central banking system. And we could see that Putin, he decided to take control of their central bank, and this is why the central bankers are very angry with Putin, because he's taking control of it. This might be the first step where Trump takes control of the central bank and detaches it from the private Western central bank system, and the United States government takes control and then eventually can dissolve it. Will this happen? We don't know right now, but this is a very good opportunity to do this. Now, we also see that Deutsche Bank, they are out there and they are saying, and this, remember, Deutsche Bank is the largest commercial bank in Germany, and they are warning about this fallout from cheap money. They're saying that everywhere we look, it looks like a bubble. We're seeing bubbles everywhere, and we're getting very nervous. Now, the Chief Executive Officer, John Cryan, called for an end to the era of cheap money in Europe, saying that the prolonged period of rock-bottom interest rates is starting to inflate asset bubbles and putting the bank at a disadvantage to U.S. rivals. Well, of course this is what's happening. And what they're saying is that we are seeing signs of bubbles in more and more parts of the capital market where we wouldn't have expected them, he said, adding that the interest rate policy has been partly responsible for the decline in earnings at European banks. What the central banks have done, they have basically made the situation a lot worse. They haven't made it a lot better at all. Actually, what they've done is they have propped up the banks with cheap money. They've created all these bubbles all over the place. And everyone's starting to realize that if the central banks cut off the stimulus, I know they're doing it covertly, some are just doing it right out there, and they start raising interest rates, the whole system falls apart. And this is why the central banks can't do this. I know they talk about it a lot. I know they're telling you they're going to shrink their balance sheet, they're going to raise interest rates, they're going to do all these things. But it is completely impossible, because if they start doing all these things, guess what? The illusion disappears and the whole system falls apart. So Cryan urged the ECB that they should basically wave goodbye to loose monetary policy, because while it helped the banks, the financial markets, and individual countries emerge from the financial crisis, it is now causing even greater upheaval. And this is absolutely correct. And if they do wave goodbye to all of this, the whole thing just comes crashing down. The central banks know this. The Fed knows this. This is why they are prepping and preparing everything in China and Russia. This is why everything's been duplicated. This is why everything's being moved. This is why we see everything happening right now. This is why gold is going up. Now, again, the central banks, they might smash it back down, but gold should be much, much higher at this point. And we see right now that as this system comes down, as all these economic indicators point to one thing and one thing only, where the entire economy is falling apart, everyone needs to be ready and prepared for what is coming. This is not going to be something where all of a sudden the stock market comes down and everything is fine, because what's going to happen is that these businesses, they're going to use the stock market as their excuse. When the market comes down, and maybe we have a little correction, corporations, businesses, they're going to use this to say, this is why we're laying off people. They're going to use this to their advantage, and they're going to start shutting plants. They're going to start shutting corporations. We saw this back in 2008, and there's going to be a lot of companies that are going to go completely out of business because a lot what we're seeing in the market is completely fake, phony, and false. I know they talk about earnings, but again, they're not talking about revenue. They're not talking about sales. That's something you can't fake. Earnings, you can fake. And when this starts to fall apart, guess what? Game over. And we could see right now that if Deutsche Bank is telling us that there's bubbles all over the place, we know that there are bubbles all over the place because now it's becoming very obvious. The real estate market's starting to fall apart. The retail market is starting to fall apart. The stock market is having troubles right now. The manipulation is becoming more and more difficult. The Fed's balance sheet is continually moving up and up and up. They're not shrinking it at all. They're holding back on raising the interest rates because they know that they can't do anything. They are stuck. Actually, they would like to have the system come down. They'd like to bring it down, and this is what they're planning to do because this way they can make the excuse to use stimulus later on. So what we're seeing right now is everything's being set up for this system to come down. This is why you need to be ready and prepared for what is coming.